Good morning and good evening, everyone. Welcome to another wonderful webinar from JumpCloud. We are going to be talking today about best practices around provisioning and securing your Windows devices. Really excited to be having this conversation today. We are going to be bringing, I'll say, a strategy and practitioner view to the conversation. So looking forward to this discussion. Today, Michelle is going to be our primary panelist. She's a principal product manager here at JumpCloud. She looks after Windows. And of course, my name is Greg Armanini. I lead devices product management here at JumpCloud, and really excited to be here today. Okay, so a little blocking and tackling. The chat window is available. You can send questions to us, at any time during the conversation. We will do our best to trap those. If there's easy ones, I'll try to answer those in real time. But typically, what we're going to do is save time at the end for Q&A. We'll do our best to get to everything. But most notably, if we're not able to get to all the questions, we will follow up and rest assured we'll get those answered for you. All right, now there's a lot happening, so I just want to do a quick plug to remind folks that there's a lot of different ways to get engaged with JumpCloud and to learn about the journey for device identity and other types of services. So we have IT Hour on a regular basis. You can always join our Slack lounge where there's both community members as well as JumpCloudians who will be there to answer your questions. We do weekly product demos. Of course, there's more and more webinars. You can go to our website and see what's coming up next. I really find them to be quite valuable, so do check out the community resources that are here for you to consume. Agenda for today. So we are going to be covering, I'll say, a limited scope of device lifecycle. There are a lot of aspects to device management, in particular for Windows. We are going to be looking at, in general, how to think about planning for the future, what components really affect that. We'll be talking about device provisioning, since that's always a big topic in Windows. It's different, of course, than every other OS. We'll also talk about the things that you need to be laying down on those devices to secure them. And of course, we'll be talking about the current scourge of cyber attacks and what you should be doing there to protect your fleet and users. Okay, real quick, we will invariably touch upon roadmap and content. So things that you see here are subject to change. So this is a standard disclaimer boilerplate. We'll let you know when we're talking about roadmap. If you ask questions about what's coming up next, obviously we will answer those to the best of our ability with the normal disclaimers. So just bear that in mind as we go through today's conversation. All right, so without further ado, we're going to dive right into it, to section one of the presentation. I want to turn this over to Michelle to lead the conversation, and let's get started.
Thanks, Greg. So when we're looking at modern device management and where the industry is going, what we see is kind of a landscape of almost a hybrid landscape where we've got on-prem solutions, we've got cloud solutions, there are point solutions, and then there are entire solutions that cover the full life cycle of the device. You can use what you want, but one thing that we want to keep in mind is that the world is multiple OS platform, and within that there's this entire life cycle that involves people, devices, the configurations, all the provisioning, and it involves the security, the best practices, the reporting, and then the insights that you get from that. And so what we're looking at in a modern lens is bringing all of those things together into one place, and in some cases managing things in new ways than we've ever managed before. Greg, did you want to add anything to that?
Not too much. I mean, I think you nailed it. The real thing I think for most practitioners to take away is, in order for you to be thinking about future-proofing your organization, you've got to be looking to a modern management model, right? And you've got to be thinking in terms of 5 to 7 years down the road. What is life going to look like? And it will have this this platform view, I think, in 99 out of 100 cases. So this is definitely that North Star that I think when I talk to customers, I make sure they're thinking in these terms, right? You don't want to have any gaps in this story to make sure you have a healthy and secure fleet.
Yeah, I agree. And I think to your point, there's definitely a shift that's happening right now where a lot of these like disparate tools that were brought in to do, great things in one area, say configuration, or to do a great job at software management, having those solutions be separate is really it's kind of top heavy in terms of the administration. It costs a lot to manage and can be a little bit slower for the folks using it. All right, so what we want to talk about then is pathfinding for your Windows fleet. And one of the things about that pathfinding is that the directory is the largest variable impacting that critical management and your security capabilities. And that probably doesn't seem obvious, but if we zoom out a little bit and look at something like Active Directory on-prem, it doesn't do all of the things that you need to do, so we'll get into that in the next chart. And then there's a shift into cloud directories. You're going to see some things with Azure that are doing some stuff for users. In JumpCloud, we've got the ability to manage the users, the devices, and the identity. So when you're thinking about how you want to move forward into that modern style, there's a lot to consider. And if you signed up for this webinar, maybe there's a good chance that you're looking to kind of get out of that Active Directory on-prem configuration, and you're not alone. Just know that your directory choice is really a big determining factor here. What do you think about that, Greg?
Yeah, I was smiling because I agree. It is a challenge. I think a high percentage of customers we talk to are coming from an on-prem lineage. And there's a raft load of services that have been built up around. The elephant in the room here that I think goes unsaid is that so many of those services presume that end users are primarily on-prem, not in a remote first world. So the pressure, I think, is really on most administrators to find solutions that allow them to tow into the cloud without completely upsetting the apple cart, meaning not everybody can do a rip and replace of AD, for instance, to something else. You've got to figure out how to extend it in a smart way. And so this is a common issue. The reality is that toe in the water approach means you're most likely going to have a hybrid mode where maybe you're using your directory on-prem with a cloud-based set of services, and that's the real trick, is how do you make that work?
Yeah, I agree. Let's get into some of the the functions really of the device management and breaking it down across Active Directory, and then also looking at that with a modern management lens. So if we have Active Directory on-prem, what do we have? We have an identity, but the default behavior is we're just managing password authentication. For provisioning, there's not really anything built into Active Directory. You have to like staple something onto that, so to speak, to manage that. For policy management, you have GPOs and commands, and those have, I would say, a long-standing presence in the IT administration world. So folks are familiar with them, but I think all the folks that are familiar with them are also familiar with the mess that can be created there. It can get very complex. So I think a lot of folks are really looking for some alternatives to that. For patching, there's some Windows Update, but it really does not provide that full life cycle of management that administrators are looking for. And then for telemetry, ongoing status of the device, Active Directory isn't providing that. Again, you're adding another point solution on top of that to get that visibility. And so, if we've laid out Active Directory, Greg, do you want to talk about how modern management is an improvement over Active Directory?
Yeah, totally. And just to be super clear here, I think that when you layer on, services to secure and provision devices, right, and future-proof them, you could be looking at a single vendor or multi-vendor. This, I think from at least my experience, is most beneficial when done from a platform view. And that's why you see it laid out this way. Most vendors that you're going to be looking at to extend your existing AD on-prem fleet and to secure it are platforms that can do it all. And I think we can talk about some of the whys there later. But in general, what you're really looking for, right, if you're making a transition from on-prem to cloud, you're obviously, as Michelle said, mastering the password by default in Active Directory. You need to be looking at ways to extend that, and you have options, right? You could choose to start mastering the password elsewhere, or you could just be looking to extend that password with an MFA or any other modern authentication method to provide that layered security model, which honestly, it's not the discussion today, but if you think about securing a device fleet, this is a critical bit, right? A very critical bit. How do you do that? And then I think provisioning, right, depending on the solution you're looking at, either a point solution or a new platform, there are going to be various ways to lay down the services that you need on top of your Windows machines. That we're, of course, going to be talking about in detail with Michelle. And a lot of this, I think, is going to be dependent upon your personal style, I'm going to say, for lack of a better word. Some organizations, in other words, are really passionate about letting users sort of take care of these things themselves. Many companies, in fact, are still doing staging-based approaches just because it's much better to drop ship the machine to the central office and then ship it out to make sure everything is good. That's just the reality, and we'll talk more about that. Policies, right? So as Michelle already talked about, that exists in spades in some ways in in AD. And there's some 4,000 plus policies that you can set. Super painful. I would be the first to point out, as I'm sure Michelle would be, that there aren't that many that matter that much, right? And that's why in modern management, you see that there's a strong bias towards editorializing that, right? What are the policies that matter so that you can enable your fleet and lower your overhead? There's a great desire, I think, from many of the customers that I talk to and others that, that moving away from the cruft that's been created with a modern tool. So that's something that we'll be talking about today. What are the ones you should look out for as you evaluate? Patching, we'll talk more about too. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but that to me is a really critical bit. For those of you who know JumpCloud, you know that we're very passionate about patching. I often tell customers, and I'm told by analysts, that this is the golden age of cyber attacks. So super critical bit of the story that we'll talk about for your devices. And then lastly, telemetry probably doesn't get enough airplay in the evaluation process, but it's important. Michelle already talked about the fact that within AD, you're not going to get that. You need to come and find that a different way. Honestly, when you think about the multi-OS story that she already talked about, it's super critical to have a singular view of your fleet in real time, and that to me is the way you create that virtuous cycle of securing, provisioning, and enforcement. So I'll pause there. Michelle, I know I waxed on a little bit, so I apologize.
I think it's great. I think this is really key. It's a concept that I'm not sure I've heard really presented in this way before about how that impact of what your directory structure is really kind of trickles down into the entire management approach. So thinking about that and thinking about your options, if you're looking to pivot, this is one of those factors that it should inform your decisions. Let's get into some more tactical stuff. So if we look at what JumpCloud can do across AD on-prem with the JumpCloud join devices, and then also with devices that have users that are in Azure, we have the ability today out of the box to bring you telemetry, which would be that status, what's happening in real time on those devices, bringing back the data that you need to get a status of what's going on, and also that you can use for reporting whenever you need it. So you really have your finger on the pulse of your environment. So that's the telemetry. It's available now across all those domain join types. Commands, same thing. We have the ability to create and schedule commands across all of our OS platforms, and we've got this available also for all of these domain join types. So that flexibility is right there regardless of what your solution of choice is. And so if you're looking at kind of a hybrid mode where you'd move maybe part of the company off of Active Directory first, and then dip the toe in the water, and then follow up with a larger part of the org, we can certainly have the technology to back that up. Moving into management policies, so this is where we get into the area of what you would be doing with GPOs today. If you have AD on-prem, we still have the concept of policies in JumpCloud, but they're configured in a different way. There's a user interface, you can click your way through it. We have some policies, a few of them that are single click, to implement, which is very, very simple and compelling. We've removed a lot of the decision-making and unnecessary complexity from that experience. And we are bringing that to devices that are bound to Active Directory and then that have Azure users on them as well. So we can handle that very, very soon. I mean, imminently. We're very close. And then after that, we'll be looking at user management and authentication. So with that, it wouldn't just be like taking the account over. We're also looking into what we can do for federation. And this really gets into JumpCloud, what we're really all about. We have an open source mentality. We're not about locking you into a really specific stack that you're stuck with and then would have to do a seriously heavy lift to move out of. And if you're a Microsoft shop, kind of exclusive today, you might be feeling the pressure of that. So if you want to think about having some options and being able to pivot to the industry best solutions when you need to, that's really what JumpCloud is about. We're here to support that. So I did a lot of talking with very little breathing. I'm going to pause there for a second, Greg, if you want to add anything.
No, I think I'm spot on with what you just said. I do believe giving flexibility to customers is critical, and the team here is really committed to providing that flexibility to allow you to choose how you want to set up your identity versus where you put your users versus what capabilities you bring to bear. Clearly we're able to provide the most capabilities in the suite when customer JumpCloud domain joins, but that's not the only way. So I think you're spot on.
I wanted to add something too. I'm pretty new to JumpCloud, and when I got here, I didn't think that we would support AD joined machines. I was really surprised that when I got here, we already had that support for telemetry and commands, and that this journey was already underway. So it's really exciting to be a part of this and get to see this kind of come to fruition. The amount of organizations we're going to be able to help it's going to be phenomenal. So really excited. All right. I think I don't know if we have any questions that we want to cover on this topic.
Actually, there was one question, and it's quite literally, can you explain telemetry, please? So maybe we could just do 2 seconds and talk about at least what our view of telemetry means. I'm thinking about OS query and stuff like that, and talk about it, from the context of the fleet.
Sure. And if you saw us laughing, we were wondering if anybody was going to ask that question. So it's beautiful that it's the first question. So telemetry is the ability to get information back about your devices to your central JumpCloud console. And it's in real time. So if you wanted to know the status of a device, what's happening there, who's on it, what applications are installed, certainly we have a large database of information about the device that you can query. But the point is that you can get that information right now. So when you're making operational decisions about like, what should I be doing today? You can really get a feel for what is happening in your environment live and respond to that instead of having, I don't know, 24-hour cycle or a 12-hour cycle that you might find in some of the other reporting solutions. And we have the ability to bring that information back on the fly. We also have a good amount of kind of response. So when you're doing things to a device, you can see what that process is like and how that's going.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's as a former administrator, I have to say that's something that I would have really liked to have. So,
Totally. Right.
yeah.
Just to give a real simple example there, even if you didn't want to use JumpCloud for anything other than telemetry, you could lay down the JumpCloud agent on an 80 join machine just if you wanted to know in general your fleet, like what kind of machines do you have, right? How much storage do they have left, right? You can get all of that kind of reporting. And we'll talk later about the implications on remote assistance and patching. But it's really the cornerstone of the future of your deployment.
Yep.
So a little time check. We're about 22 in, so we'll try to pace ourselves here and get through all the content. There's a lot to cover. So
There is message received. All right. I'm curious. Who's here for device provisioning? If you want to send a +1. I'm really looking forward to talking about this. Since I got here, I've been hearing a lot of questions about, how do what should I be doing to get the OS on a device? What do I do for a new device? What do I do for one that's gone through a repair and has to be, refreshed or redeployed to a new employee? So I wanted to cover the methods because there are multiple methods, and depending on your organization and your style, to Greg's point, one might be better for you than another, and in some cases you might need more than one of those methods. The first time that I did device provisioning, I did a search to see what the options were. There was no device provisioning school, so I had to kind of figure it out on the fly. And I would say if you're an admin that's like at kind of engineer level, maybe a 201, you've been doing it a while, you can write some scripts, you may have touched on this before. If you're a new administrator, at some point you're going to run into this. So let's get into it. The first method, I just talked over my screen, buried the lead here. Why you want to do this, I guess I should touch on that first, is you need to have a device properly configured before you give it to the end user. If today you're deploying something to the end user and then kind of tidying it up after the fact, you are introducing some risk into your environment. So we're not going to call everybody's process baby ugly or anything like that, but you do really want to think about maturing and how to stay resilient, because there are just like bots out there trying to break into your machine all day long. So let's get those devices patched. You want the OS to be hardened. You want to have the applications configured so that the end user can start working. They don't spend 2, 3, 4 days getting their device configured, and so on. So we want to get as close to that fully configured state as possible, and then just leave the manual steps for very small configs that are specific to that user. So this is really what it's about, is that automation. So I think one of the first ones folks are going to want to ask about is Autopilot. I've certainly heard some questions about it since I got here. The question is, hey, when are you going to integrate with Autopilot? And if you don't know what that is, I'll get to it in a minute. But if you do know and you've been asking, this is in our product vision. There's some foundational things that we have to, lay down before we can go down this path, but it's definitely where we want to go. Autopilot is a way to deploy the operating system using MDM. Now the device comes to you somewhat configured. Your reseller is going to bring it to you with an operating system on it. But then you're going to want to tidy that up, patches, hardening, configurations, apps. So you can do this with a very simple enrollment and then a follow-up with some things that you could do with your agent-based enrollment. This will give you kind of a complete solution. So for those of you who are good with Autopilot, I'm going to have you pause, just take a sip of water for a second. Those of you who are new to it, if you know about what this would look like on a Mac, it's a similar concept, but there are some subtle but very important differences. You can still have a zero-touch enrollment. That is possible, but there is a cost associated with doing it on Windows. That is, I would say, a little bit greater than doing it on a Mac. And that is because in Microsoft, they do lock you in. So if you want to do this, we are going in this direction. We will not be able to get you around the requirement for Azure. You are going to need to have an Azure premium license of some kind. I think I saw maybe half a dozen or more different licenses that cover this. The entry level that we're looking at is about $9 a month per user, and that goes all the way up to $55, depending on the other types of stuff that you're buying from Microsoft along with this. So there are less expensive versions of Azure, but in order to get Autopilot, you're going to need to have a premium license. So once you have that, it also requires an MDM. And so this is where, Autopilot is not Intune. Intune is an MDM. You still need Autopilot. You could use a different MDM, but you still need Microsoft Autopilot. So we want to think about those and kind of decouple them, and then that will give you a little bit more flexibility in your stack. You just can't decouple Autopilot from Azure. So once you have that, it's a lot like how you would do this on a Mac. You're going to register as an MDM provider. You're going to provide your Dun & Bradstreet number. You have to establish yourself as a pretty serious organization. And so it's kind of from medium all the way up to enterprise size organizations. If you're a small shop, if you're not really doing any imaging on the regular, once or twice a month, or even maybe up to 5 times a month, that's probably a little bit too small to take on this effort, but it's up to you. Either way, you're going to want to get your JumpCloud agent on there. And in Autopilot, it would be very easy. You would create an MDM policy, and that would just install the JumpCloud Windows agent. So you'd have the device enrolled in MDM. That could be zero touch if it qualifies, if it's a new device. If it's already deployed, you'd have your end user enroll it, and then that JumpCloud agent would just be installed automatically. So really, really easy to do. Hard to set up. Once it's up, though, easy to keep it rolling. So I'm going to move on because there are some more options, and then I'll summarize and we can compare them. The next one, if you do Google search today, you'll find people, especially on Reddit, that will say, oh, you can just have Dell do it for you. They have something called Image Assist, or have CDW if they're your reseller. They have a thing called Clean Image. SHI has a version of this. What it is it's a configured out of the box device that is sold and shipped to you configured. So you set it up. You configure a reference device. So you take a laptop and you set it up the way that you want it to be. So all of your laptops would come to you that way. You give that back to your reseller. So you give it to Dell or CDW or whoever. And then they take that, and then the next time they sell you devices, it'll come pre-configured. So really easy. There's a little bit longer lead time, and there is a higher security risk because of that turnaround time. You will have to you'll have to anticipate when you're going to want to make changes, and you will be behind on patch. So that's something you'll have to think about. There is an extra cost. For CDW, it was $32.99 a device. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it would add up over time. This will not work for reprovisioning. So if that device, if an employee moves on or a device comes in for repair, that Image Assist isn't going to help you anymore. So you'd need to have another method. This is really for medium to enterprise size organizations, or if you have a really large hardware refresh, or like you're in high growth mode for 6 to 9 months, you got a lot of new people coming in, acquisition, something like that, it's great. I would not call this your sole method. It's kind of a special forces type of method. To get the JumpCloud agent on there, if you're doing this, it's really in the back end, it's a ghost image. So you would do the same thing as you would do for a ghost image, and that's just, you leverage the run once key. It's just a registry key. You would put a path to the installation files, which are stored locally on that reference device. And then you would just have the agent install. So it's pretty straightforward. If you are an IT admin and you kind of know what I'm talking about here, maybe you've done this before and you're thinking, well, Michelle, I have multiple apps that I want to install. I can't fit them all in the run once key. You're right. You'd have to write a small script for that. So, even though the reseller would be doing it for you, you are heavily involved in this effort. So, Reddit makes it look easy, but let's really understand what we're talking about here. Disk image. This is like a ghost image. It's a bootable disk image. It's a snapshot in time. It's really fast. I mean, if you want to deploy something super quick, you can do that with a ghost image. The way to set it up is you configure a reference machine like in the previous example. Then you run sysprep to depersonalize the things that are installed there so it doesn't leave any information about the administrator or any user accounts. And then you capture the image. So it is a moment in time and it gets stale, the minute that you're done with it. It requires frequent updating. And if you've done this before, and I know some of you have, if you make a mistake when you're setting up your image, you have to start all over again. So it can be a little bit frustrating, but if it's not something that you do very often, this could work for you. Just understand at the end, you will have to keep everything patched and up to date, because if it's not on that disk image, it's not going to get installed. So you really have to plan how you're going to do that. The thing at the bottom there about clever admins equals smart innovations, I've seen so many cool things done with Ghost. Especially in the area of like a bootable, like a network boot where there's a centrally hosted image and you could pull it down over the network. This is not going to be in the Ghost instructions. So it's something that you would have to, develop on the side. So we're getting into like an engineer/architect 301 level here. But it's something you'd only really have to set up once and then maintain it. And how to embed the JumpCloud agent is the same as with the hardware reseller model. You would want to have the agent install after the device is provisioned to an end user. And then the last one is the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, or MDT. If you've ever heard the term MDT bundle, that's what we're talking about here. What this is a custom out-of-box experience. It is very different from the previous 3 methods. And it's free.
I didn't get that. Oh. Could you try again?
No, Siri, I wasn't talking to you. It's free. It's supported by Microsoft. And a lot of third parties out there have skinned MDT. So they'll try to sell you MDT, but that's really all it is they've put a UI on top of it. So when you're looking at solutions out there, if you run through MDT, you might feel like, hey, this is a little familiar. That's what you're running into. There are a lot of small moving parts with this approach. It's a lot of little, basically XML files. So it can seem a little complicated the first time, especially if you're not used to doing deep work. But once you have this configured, it is so easy to keep up to date. It's very easy to inject more patches, super easy to switch out the applications when the versions change. It does require a touch. There's no vendor lock-in at all. Again, free and pretty easy. And how you'd embed the JumpCloud agent is in the MDT console, there's a graphical interface that you can use to configure the bundle. And so there's a point, it's just a browsable interface. It's pretty basic and lightweight, but easy to understand. You browse to the MDT share, you go to the applications folder, you hit the plus sign for a new application. You just go through the UI. It has you browse to the installation files. You'd put you'd pick the JumpCloud agent installer, and then you'd put your connect key, the very silent no restart, the same command line string that you would use for the other methods. So it's pretty simple. This is used by organizations of all sizes. It's pretty much what admins are, doing today if they don't have Autopilot or they don't want to pay for Azure. This is what you're going to find. And I would say for any organization, if you're not sure, I would start here because it's free. It's not too hard. Lots of tutorials out there. And if this is something you'd be interested to see in a future webinar, I'd be interested to hear that feedback so we know. So I just went on a whole bunch. I do want to do a summary, and then we'll see if there are any questions. So of the 4 methods, the first being Autopilot, that would be a hybrid method where you have MDM, you'd have to have Azure, you configure Autopilot, and then you would add in your JumpCloud agent, and that would allow you to do telemetry, commands, but also the MDM APIs, and it makes that zero-touch provisioning possible. Zero-touch provisioning, much like on a Mac, is not going to grandfather, so it won't work for your devices that are already out there. It's for the new ones only. Hardware reseller, you're going to make a disk image, and your reseller is going to put it on for you. Longer lead times, you don't have as much control over the timing, but every new device you get will have your custom image on it. Disk image, you do it yourself, very fast. Can be a little frustrating to manage, but it's good if you're a smaller operation. And there are lots of options to kind of innovate with that. And then the MDT bundle, this is the automated native Windows install. So we're not committing to a disk image. It's not a stale point in time, very customizable, and it's hard to argue with free. So that was a lot of stuff. Should I pause here for questions? So I think they were
I'm sorry, I'm trying to answer questions in real time. There is one question that I apologize, you may have already towed in on this one, but I'm going to ask it. The question is, hypothetically, if I'm not going to be using any out-of-box provisioning, what of these different provisioning methods would you recommend? Is there one that is the best? Or is it just depend?
I mean, it does depend on what's going on. So they each have their, pluses and minuses depending on your current situation. I would say the MDT, or the customized out-of-box experience, is the one that's most applicable to different organizations. It's the Autopilot's the most modern, but the MDT custom out-of-box is available to everybody. It's free. There's no Azure hurdle. There isn't a bunch of extra infrastructure to manage. So it's a good place to start while you're deciding what you want that next path to be.
Got it. And related, there's another question here, which I think is a good one because I don't recall if we explicitly covered it. I think an Autopilot approach presumes, right, a post-enrollment laydown of JumpCloud agent. What about like end user self-service? Is that a valid method? A few folks are asking about connect keys, and there are ways, right, to work around that. And maybe you can talk about the different options for self-enrollment and therefore self-imaging of the device or setting policies. And we can maybe touch on that a little bit. That'd be great.
I think I might have to ask you to rephrase, but let me say back what I think I understand. So what you're looking for is what are the other enrollment methods for the agents? Or is it what are the other imaging methods?
I think it's the way I'll recast this question is imagine if I send one of my employees down to Best Buy, they get a Windows machine on an emergency basis. How do I just tell them to go to jumpcloud.com and download the agent? Is that something I can do easily? Maybe that's the simplest way to think about it.
I mean, you can do. It's reasonably easy. We also have actually an MSI that can be used, and you can embed the connect key into it, and that's probably something that would be easier for an end user to manage. For if you're a software organization and you've got a lot of developers, they're going to have no problem with an XE and a command line switch. They're going to be on it, and it's going to be done. But for other types of staff, you might need to give them something a little bit more simple. So I would recommend the MSI for the agent install in those cases.
Yeah, I think so. And that does bring up a roadmap question that we'll save to the end. I'm looking at the clock. For those of you, I'm just looking at the trend line. We may go a little over. We're going to try to get to all the questions. There are a lot. And really, I think what Michelle just hit on is the notion of what we call a one-touch enrollment versus a zero-touch enrollment, which is a valid use case that we can touch on at the end. So maybe what we can do is we can jump forward to the next slide, and I'll keep answering questions where I can.
Thanks, Greg. All right, I want to cover a few essential Windows device policies. And when I go into these policies, you're going to see some familiar, if you've looked up essential Windows policies, I'm not going to be recommending anything very different than what you're finding out there. I'll explain why. And I also want to talk about the ramifications of implementing these policies. So you've got your devices deployed, you got them hardened, they're patched, and now you want to do some more policy-based management to keep them secure and compliant. So in JumpCloud, we talked earlier about the policies. This is an easy, basically no-code approach to configuring policies. We have a couple that are single-click, and we are moving into that direction where you would apply a single-click or one-touch for the admin, so to speak, policy that will apply that to all the devices. We'll have more out-of-box policies this year. I know Greg alluded to there being over 4,000 native Windows policies. I'm going to tell you right now, for futures, we're not ever going to plan on delivering all 4,400, but we do want to deliver more of the popular ones that you've been asking for. So we've got like a lot out of the box, but we're always looking to add more to give you more flexibility without having to use any custom code. We do support all the native policies, so we support all 4,400 using just the registry key. So we have a user interface where you can paste in the registry key for the GPO, and we can apply it that way if you need to. For on-prem Active Directory, you have fewer options, and we touched on this in that first section. You can configure group policy, you can edit the registry for local policy, but there's not a lot of visibility of what's happening. It's hard to tell which devices are compliant, and it's very easy to create a mess. It's hard to know, which devices have which policies. So let's move past that. I think most folks that are familiar with AD on-prem have felt that. So I'm going to get into these policies. So I mentioned earlier that these policies are probably not unique to your top N list of policies. This is because NIST recommends these. These are policies that apply to SOC, CIS. They're very common, and the thing I wanted to do differently here is just say, hey, there are ramifications. So the first one is prohibiting access to the control panel, meaning don't allow an end user to get into the control panel, because that is the center of configurations for the device. You can set a policy for that, but in JumpCloud, you can also set the user to be just a regular user instead of an administrator, and then you don't have to worry about that. They're not going to have access to the control panel. It's simple. They won't have write access to the control panel. The next is preventing access to the command prompt. This one is a little bit more touchy. You can prevent unauthorized workarounds by stopping folks from going to the command prompt and running commands. They are side doors to getting around security policies, so I can understand why you want to do that, and it's probably a good idea. Some of your non-IT users might require, though, having a command prompt, or they may be more efficient using that, and so you need kind of a plan before you implement this. Who is going to be sensitive to that? Are there groups of users who would be negatively impacted? It would slow down their productivity. This is something you really want to consider. You can be as secure as you want to and prevent folks from getting their work done. There's no point, right? Your business isn't going to do very well with that. So you want to keep finding that sweet spot. And I would say the access to the command prompt is one of those areas where you need to think very carefully about who you can do that to. The next is denying access to removable storage. This is DLP. This concept's been around for a long time, which is data loss prevention. It's preventing someone from, plugging in a USB and putting data on it and taking it away. Or alternately, preventing them from taking maybe malicious data and injecting it into your environment. This is very good. You can block the device without blocking the entire port. If this isn't something that you're doing, you might want to look at your industry, and as you're leveling up and growing your company, in order to sell into more organizations, these are the types of things that you're going to have to implement. This is a very common one that you're not going to be able to get around it really in any of the compliance columns, I guess, or industry stacks. The next one is prohibiting the user install. This is a software restriction just to stop end users from installing apps, even in their own context. If you basically set a user to be a regular standard user, you don't need to configure this policy because a standard user wouldn't be able to do this. If you currently do not restrict software installs and you implement this, there will be an impact. And again, you have to think about what that's going to do. And I can think of two things. One is if you've got developers, engineers, people that need to install utilities, or they're doing R&D, this is going to be a tough one for them to handle. And you might need to have an exception or put them in a group where this isn't the case, and then not give them access to as many essential assets. The other is for your everyday users who are used to being able to install things on behalf of IT. In a smaller operation, you can get away with this to a point, but then again, when you start selling into larger organizations or providing your solutions to people in certain industries, you're not going to be able to allow that anymore. So you have to think about, before you turn this on, what is your plan and who is going to be resistant to this so you can work around it. For those regular users who just need occasional, elevation, you can do that through the JumpCloud console. So, you could make someone a regular standard user, and then if they needed to install an app, it's easier, for them to install it than to have you do it. You can elevate them temporarily, let them get that done, and then just bring them back down to a standard user. That's a less invasive way. I don't think that approach is going to work for engineers, but it's going to be fine for standard users. And then the last one is password complexity. I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on this. I know that we're moving into areas where we're using things more than passwords, and really starting to look at the area of password lists and what that means. But you will still have to have passwords even as you move into passwordless workflows, because you have to have that initial authentication established. And so you don't want to have a very simple password. You don't want to have a repeatable. There are a lot of different schools of thought on this, and so I'm not going to prescribe it. I think your school of thought is going to depend on your industry. But this is something that's there that you can configure with the policy very simply within JumpCloud. And that brings us to our last section. Do we have any questions, or should I just keep going?
There is one question, a brief question. I think that you may have already spoken to it. The question is, how far does this get me to, like, the some part of NIST, or is this the essence of it? I think it's more of the latter, but that, just so you could clarify that.
Sure. So NIST isn't what, NIST is an organization within the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's a National Institute for Standards and Technology, and they create what they're basically thought leaders for security, and they influence a lot of the industry, not just in federal and defense, but really across North America, and certainly in other continents. So it's spanning borders. And this influence isn't like NIST isn't a setting or a list. These items you will find on multiple compliance checklists. So certainly you would see this in CIS, DISA-STIGs, USGCB. You will find these same types of controls that need to be implemented. And generally, it's not about how have you implemented it. It's have you implemented it, and which devices are compliant and which aren't. So it's a very binary approach, but it's not limited to a single list. So does this get you all the way there? Probably not. And what is the gap between this list and where you need to be? It depends on your industry. and which of those baselines or checklists are subject to you within that industry. So healthcare would have a different list than, say, banking.
Thank you. Cool.
Yep. All right. So moving into the last section, just want to talk about JumpCloud Patch and how to protect your devices from vulnerabilities and cyber attacks. The number one thing that you can do to reduce your risk is reducing the attack surface. Number one, fundamental. I know patch is like boring to people because you've been hearing about it forever, and it's like this monthly duty that you have to do. It's like doing the laundry, it's never done. There's always more to do. I get it, been there. I've lived that for a number of years, but you can't stop doing it. You have to be vigilant and stay up to date, and it's more and more important as the months go by. So I know you hear this, but it's a reminder to find better ways to do this, because I remember this being very time consuming, Greg. I remember spending a whole bunch of time going through and like picking specific patches and targeting different machines, and then figuring out the restart, and then I'd have to go and do a different group of machines, and then a different group of machines. And I spent, in some organizations, that's almost an FTE.
Yeah, totes. That's so true. Yeah.
So how are you going to keep up with this? You have to, it's really about automation. So what we have in JumpCloud is a patch management solution. I don't think that just by looking at this, circle diagram that you're going to really pick up on what's different here. So I'm just going to touch on this lightly and then get to the punchline. When you're doing patch management, you have to detect, what is relevant to be deployed. You can spend a lot of time in there, but you don't have to. So you're going to identify what needs to be patched. What are those patches? How is that going to go out? When? Which groups are tolerant to taking things right away? Which groups are higher risk that need to be patched as soon as possible to reduce the risk? Which audiences of people are restart resistant and they need a little more time to plan? You all have some of these people. You want to think about that. And then for organizations that are very sensitive to configs, you can also have that concept of pilot, which is to test those patches. I think a lot of that is starting to go away, especially in Windows and Microsoft. It does occasionally send something out that breaks something, but most of their patches can be rolled back. So some folks are even skipping that pilot step and just saying, lay it all out there, install everything. And if there's a broken patch this quarter, I'll roll it back. It's a lot faster for some organizations to do that. So if that's something you've been thinking about, it's pretty safe to go and do that. If you've got a group of systems that are very sensitive, you might want to put those in a separate group. And once you're done with that, you deploy the patches and then you validate how well did we do, what patches are remaining, what devices are still unpatched, so I can go and take care of that. So this flow, I think, is pretty similar to the flow that you'll see in a lot of organizations. JumpCloud does something a little different, though. What we do is we give you the concept of 4 different types of groups. And for each of those groups, you're thinking about them not necessarily by configuration, but by their either level of risk or value of the asset, or the level of tolerance for the end user to the timing of the restart. So there are Vanguard groups here. You can see early adopters. We actually have 4 out-of-the-box groups. And what you would configure here is you think about in the center, the Vanguard, maybe they have to take those patches right away. This would be your test machines, probably a chunk of IT. I would think also of, again, your most sensitive devices that you want to reduce that attack surface immediately, get those patched right away. Then the early adopters might be in the next day. General adoption might be 2 days. Late adopter might be 4, 5, 7 days. It's up to you and the tolerance based on your industry and also based on how competitive you're trying to be in your field. If you're trying to be more secure than your competitors, you might adapt these to your market instead of just to your needs. What you get in the end of this, and this is so cool, you basically set those dates or the how long you want to defer this per group. This is a policy, so it's one per group. Set it and let it rip. Not let's make a baseline and then go back and pull out all the superseded patches and then put in the new patch. No, okay, this is going to manage itself. You're going to set this policy, and then those devices are going to remain patched as new patches come in from Microsoft, scheduled to the number of days that you defer them. So one policy to rule them all, and you get out of that monthly baseline work. How awesome does that sound? So if you like this, if this sounds awesome, if this is going to save you a lot of time, give me a heck yeah. I want to see it. I want to see it. I want to know who would value this. So Greg, did I hit all the things? Because this patch wasn't my product. I wish it was, but it wasn't mine. But it's brilliant, and I wish I had this when I was an admin.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you did hit on it. I think for those of you who may not know the product or have tried it, it's out there today to try. Go have at it. And Michelle's not wrong, right? The power of this feature is that it is a fire and forget experience, and it does take away the pain of the Patch Tuesday. It presumes that you want to have your devices up to date, and it simplifies the whole process. You may have seen in that previous screenshot that it's cross OS. It's the same experience, right, for Mac, Linux, and Windows. So it's a fleet-wide solution, and it could eventually or will eventually extend to like supervised iOS devices, etc. So just know it's super powerful and simple. It's where the industry is going. There's a question here about how does this compare with what other Microsoft tools are, like Windows Update for Business? Have you heard about Windows Auto Patch? Maybe you could add a little color on there about how you think this compares. I think this is more Windows Auto Update than anything.
Yeah, I mean, Microsoft is doing what we're doing. If you look, I don't know if it's released yet or if they're going to release it sometime this year, but I thought I saw something about them trying to do an auto patch approach too. So the big difference is that it's multi-platform. And today's organizations born in the cloud, you've got Macs, you've got Windows, you've probably got some Linux. So JumpCloud will cover all of this with this auto patch experience, where Microsoft is going to cover Windows.
Awesome.
That's the difference.
Okay, so we've gotten to the end, fortunately. If there's any more questions, keep them coming. We can try to answer a few more and stay a little longer. Again, if we don't get to everything, we will follow up, of course, offline. And happy to answer whatever you guys have. So keep them coming in. I'm looking here real quick. There is a patch question that I've got. Maybe you could answer. I know it's not your product, Michelle, but the question is, so for patching, how soon is some form of app patching coming to JumpCloud?
Yeah, I would say very soon. We have a lot of the ingredients that we need to make that happen. So watch this space. Because we will have something, I would say, very compelling coming your way. And I hate to be cagey, I don't have a date.
Yeah, so that's fair, right? It's there. We are working on that. The way to think about it is we're focusing on the most targeted applications, third-party apps, i.e., browsers first. So you should expect to see that here, coming down the line. So. 90% of your bases are basically covered. I'm looking for questions still. let's see, there's one, maybe if somebody can ask again, what about Windows general adoption? If that is in reference to ring policies, I'm sorry, Michelle, I don't have a good way to translate this one, but for the asker, if you want to re-ask that, that would be helpful. And we'll see if we can answer it. But in general, if you're talking about the ring policies, we do try to cover that, you know, from the early to the late adopters and everywhere in between. It generally maps to what Microsoft does in their ring policies. So there is a question, is there a way to block certain patches completely? I can take that one, Michelle, if you don't have that one.
Please.
Okay, so today, so the way to think about it, you know, we're currently not targeting the patch feature for folks who want to pause, evaluate, you know, in the old like Windows Update for Business style, where you know have a process to do that. We would normally expect you to look and evaluate and test in Vanguard and set your other ring policies, you know, a little bit farther out to give yourself some time. You know, and what you would do is you would, you know, extend if you wanted to block, but this presumes in general that Microsoft is doing the right thing and that you want a fire and forget experience. Now, we may adjust that in the future, but you know, we'd love to get more feedback on that about how important is like approval workflows for patches, right? Right now, that's not something our customers have told us to focus on. Okay. All right. So we are, it looks like I'm going through the list one more time. I think we are good on questions. So I think we can call it a wrap. I just want to say this has been a lot of fun, Michelle. I really appreciate your insights and taking the time to speak with everybody. It's been a lot of fun and very insightful. Folks, feel free if I missed something in the chat windows. You know, just know we'll get to it offline, and either somebody from our community or our team will, you know, reach out and help out with those questions. So that's all I got for now. Good times. Thanks again, Michelle.
Thanks, Greg.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.